What is the most unexplained thing you've ever witnessed? Write in the comments what you think about it. What's the most inexplicable thing you've seen? Enjoy the show. Story 1. Oh, this is a perfect place for me. When I was little, around 14 or 15 years ago-ish at late evening, there was a shadow that suddenly appeared in front of the window curtain that looked like they were monkeys. I know it happened because my parents saw it as well, and they rushed towards it, but they were gone by the time. Some of our neighbors also saw the same thing. Story 2. I was home for Thanksgiving my freshman year of college. My family always hosted my dad's side for the holiday, and one of my uncles from out of state would fly in and stay with us. His flight was due to arrive late this particular night, so my parents went to a basketball game and left me home alone. About 9 p.m., I hear the door from the garage open and close as I'm hanging out in my bedroom upstairs. I then hear what sounds like a person in spurred boots walk slowly and heavily through the kitchen, into the front hall, and over to the first-floor bathroom. I hear the door close firmly. My uncle worked on a dairy farm and rode horses in his free time. I figured he had arrived early and had just worn his boots on the plane or something. I call out, but nobody answers. I get a little tense. This is not the first strange thing to happen in this house, so I'm immediately on edge. I call my parents, who answer with the sounds of the basketball game in the background. I ask if Uncle Monty could have landed early, and they say no, as he would have let them know so they could coordinate a new pickup time. I say okay and hang up. I grab a wooden staff I got as a kid from the Renaissance Festival, LOL, and cautiously walk downstairs. I see the bathroom door. It's closed and the light inside is off. I call out again for Uncle Monty. No answer. So I creep forward, open the door quickly, and it's empty. I was completely sober and fully functioning, but nobody was around to corroborate what I heard. However, several of my friends also witnessed firsthand unexplainable things in that house, so they believe my story. I will never forget it. Story 3. Walking out of the woods in the dark after a deer hunt, kept catching moving lights in my periphery. When I would turn to face them, they would move quickly out of full vision. They were not lightning bugs. They were much too fast and shone consistent and very bright yellow. Scared me because they approached very close and I thought they may touch me or hurt me. They had me spinning in circles trying to see what was following me. Decided just to focus on the trail and haul ass out of the woods. When I got to my truck, I threw my bow and my pack into the bed and jumped in quickly and got the hell out of there. As I was pulling out, I stopped my truck to look back. In the tree line were hundreds of yellow orbs hovering in the wood line like they were watching me leave. Story 4. Aliens' interventions using hovering spheres of light were shiny like the loading screen of the latest Apple products. The shiny, fast little illuminated object possessed a speed and output even immeasurable to us even now. These vehicles move at dimensions which produce instant fears and anxieties upon the child's relaxed but ultimately watchful gaze and worried mind. #sleepless nights. Furthermore, these modes of transport via what the alien controls exact such precise movement and handling perhaps. Maybe even just feared to be completely all-powerful. And also, just as well, possibly even more all-knowing. And the rate at which something like that makes an advance towards you and your very resting spot, here in this very house. And also, not to mention that time of night, bedtime, and also during Christmas Eve. So awesome. Really, very interesting just as well. Story 5, TLDR, I watched a man walk into a wall and vanish. Some years ago, when I was 20, I was living in a quiet English seaside town. One cold winter's morning, I went for a walk along the beach. The place was empty. Bar one man I could see a short distance ahead of me. We were both walking along the track at the foot of the sea wall. When the man was maybe about 15 meters in front of me, walking in the same direction with his back to me, he suddenly took a sharp left. He proceeded to walk straight into the seawall and disappear. I was looking right at him whilst he did it. The weather was clear and I wasn't on any substances. He just walked into the wall and vanished. He was wearing a hoodie and jeans and looked very normal, about middle age. I checked the wall afterwards, solid concrete. The beach was vast and empty. He had nothing to hide behind. I'm still completely stumped. No one believes me. To be fair, I wouldn't either, but I know what I saw. Story 6. This isn't all that crazy, but it was very freaky at the time, LOL. It's 2016 and I'm stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I'm fishing a creek off the Intercoastal Waterway alone in my boat. I was in maybe 20 of water. It was a beautiful afternoon, approaching dusk. I observe something in the water and reel my line in to stand and watch. 50 yards away looks to be a very old brass scuba helmet surfacing and sinking. This happened a couple of times until it surfaced and remained. It stayed in place as if someone were wearing it and had stopped to watch me. It felt like maybe 10 seconds. When I went to leave, I can't remember how long after, I saw no trace of anything that resembled it. There were no scuba markers in the water or other boats nearby. Story 7. In 1994-ish, I came across a motorcycle accident on Jolan Road between Fort Hunter Liggett and Highway 101. I had a couple other guys with me, and we had been attending Federal Police Officers Reserve training on post. When we came across the motorcycle accident, we ran down and saw a guy with a motorcycle helmet face down in the dirt. You could see where he went off the road, skipped a couple of times, went through a barbed wire fence and a few trees. A tree finally stopped his forward momentum. When we got there, he was breathing, and his friends told me his name was Jesse. He was face down, but breathing, and since we could see that his helmet had broken the tree that stopped him, I didn't want to move him without some help. Paramedics showed up and he quit breathing. We worked on him for quite a while, but he didn't make it. A year later, I was driving up the Cuesta grade from San Luis Obispo towards Paso Robles. It was raining and there was a ton of traffic. I can still see it clear as day. I could see Jesse's face between my steering wheel and the driver's door, and he said, "Watch out." That jolted me quite a bit, but when I looked right, I saw that an 18-wheeler was having a hard time, had drifted out of their lane and was inches from my door. I think Jesse kept me from a terrible accident that day. I haven't seen that since, but I think about him often. Story 8. Once lost my bank card as you do, looked everywhere in the house for it. One evening, dog was barking and scratching under her crate as usual, thought a biscuit had been hiding under there. Nope, picked up the crate, and there as my bank card sat underneath it. No idea how or why it got there or why the dog decided to tell me about it. Story 9. I've had several of these in my life, but the most startling was also my first memory ever, or my moment of gaining consciousness. My first memory, the beginning of my life, went thus. I was at my 3rd birthday party sitting with my older cousin, except I was watching myself and her in third person from high up. Then my camera POV looking at myself got closer and closer to me until eventually life went into first person, and has been ever since. The feeling to me was as if my soul entered my body. But as an adult, I'm not convinced that souls exist. Consciousness is a mechanical process of the brain, and there is sadly no heaven nor hell when we die. But this is an odd thing I can't reconcile. Story 10. When I had to move my mom to assisted living, I put up cameras at her home, inside and out. Her living room light would always turn on by itself. There was no wiring fault. I finally turned it off at breaker level, and it stayed off. When I signed papers to start her estate sale, it's like she knew somehow and decided to move out of this world. The same day I got a call, she had brain cancer that accelerated rapidly and had a week to live. After she passed for several days, I'd get alerts frequently that the camera had spotted someone at the back door and outlined a person. Then finally one day it stopped. A few days ago, my trash can woke me up opening and closing its lid. Then on my motorcycle, the garage door in my apartment building came down on my helmet with enough force to knock me and the bike down. Trash can did the lid thing exactly once more and has been fine since. Story 11. I saw a completely silent Vanta black triangular craft fly directly above me at probably less than 2,000 feet. I worked the AM shift at a radio station and was on my way to work just before 5 a.m. The day was just barely beginning to break, so the outline of the craft was clearly visible. It was a perfect triangle, with no perforations or wings. It was flying in a way that seemed to be slowly rotating as it flew. I pulled over on the side of the road and stepped out of my car to watch it. I had it in plain view for probably 2 to 3 minutes. Story 12. Oddly enough, light. Now don't get me wrong, most light is explainable. I mean light in a hallway with no windows, in a direction method that makes no sense and never happens again. Call it lights or orbs or whatever, but I have run into things in the blackest of nights that are little balls of light and I have no possible source to connect them to. Story 13. Back in summer of 2001, a friend of mine and I went to our local rainforest twisty roads to enjoy an early 1980s Toyota Corolla station wagon my mom let me borrow from a lady friend of hers with permission. I was on army leave and had no car of my own. It was a manual, so I was having fun being the first time I drove one by myself. We got really deep into the rainforest, pitch black except the car lights, and suddenly we saw a reflective thing floating on the middle of the road. We got out to try to make sense of that weirdness, since it was so reflective, like a sign. Mistake. It was rabbit-looking creature without legs, just creepily hovering in slow motion as we watched with our mouths agape. As we saw it float in front of us towards the edge of the road, about 20 feet away, it changed into a rock in front of our eyes. Imagine a video editing trick, but in person. One frame, it's that weird thing, and then it stops floating and suddenly it's just a stationary rock. My friend and I looked at each other like, we fear-giggled our way into the car so fast, and I drove down that stupidly steep road, doing 35 miles per hour and 15 miles per hour twisties. Poor car's tires were chirping so freaking loud. It's a miracle we didn't lose control. I was so focused. We went straight to a nearby hotel about 10 minutes away where our friend worked at in the parking ticket booth. We excitedly told him. In 2024, he still doesn't believe us. If my friend wasn't with me, I also wouldn't believe and think it was a fake memory. Story 14, flashing in the sky. Was camping in a friend's yard. We were up late and we both saw a blinking light. Much brighter than a plane, but also probably just as high or higher, about 2x per second and spread across a single patch of sky. Imagine a big square up there, with the light blinking in a random pattern inside the square. It did this several times in maybe 15-second bursts. At that height, I bet the square was a mile wide. So what could blink like that? Story 15. I was 14, coming home from a small concert with a friend at the time. Her uncle had picked us up, her mom had taken us so we weren't unattended. It was like 2/3 a.m. Driving down the road, and we swore there was a dude just walking in front of the car, so her uncle tried to stop the car. We were going pretty fast, so he just slowed down and we braced ourselves thinking we were about to hit this poor guy. Nothing, we just kept going, and no one was behind us. My parents were convinced I was just hyper from the gig and tired, but all of us in the car saw it. I hate driving along those roads at night now. Story 16. I lived in an old neighborhood in an old city in high school, and on my walk home from school one day, I witnessed something odd. I have had many experiences, and this one may be one of the most unsettling. I was walking up one of the old city streets in the downtown, and passed by a very old brick building that had been undergoing renovations for a few years, on and off. It was a hot day, and as I walked past the door was open, and inside was a large open room with no windows and a tile or linoleum floor with cream-colored walls. There were several wooden cots across both sides of the wall, each with a small white mattress and sheets, and each bed had someone in it, either sick or elderly or both, as though I'd stumbled upon a field hospital in a tropical war zone. This being a sizable city in Canada, I was taken aback. I froze and stared into the room. A fan was on at the entrance facing the street, I assumed to blow the hot air out. One person was standing over someone else in the bed, as if they were tending to them like a nurse. Nobody moved. Nobody looked at me, despite the fact I'm standing in the doorway just staring at them, as if I was looking at a photo of the past. I got chills and shook them off and kept walking. I told a handful of people who thought it was odd, but we all just assumed it was a makeshift care facility of some sort. However, now having walked by the same building, the doorway I had seen this image in, through the window, you can see it actually leads to a very old staircase, and there is no room here at street level. I have absolutely no idea what happened here, and it still makes me a little unsettled and confused to recall. Story 17. I am a science student, and once I was explaining to one of my relative about kidney failure, and how does one needs dialysis regularly. I suddenly recalled one of my uncle, who used to visit us often when I was kid, used to play with me and used to bring me many toys as well, having the same problem, but just as I was about to use him as an example, I suddenly had this realization that he is no more, and so I shouldn't talk about him. Then the very next day, my mother was talking to someone on phone that how that uncle of mine was a great person and had to leave us so early. I rushed to my mom to ask her, confirming my worst fear. I was so shocked to know that my uncle died the very next day I had this premonition. I was so freaked out and so sad it makes me feel weird and sad even typing this. I hope he is happy and in peace in heaven. Story 18. Once I was explaining to one of my relative about kidney failure, and how does one needs dialysis regularly. I suddenly recalled one of my uncle having the same problem, but just as I was about to use him as an example, I suddenly had this realization that he is no more, and so I shouldn't talk about him. Then the very next day, my mother was talking to someone on phone that how that uncle of mine was a great person and had to leave us so early. I rushed to my mom to ask her, confirming my worst fear. I was so shocked to know that my uncle died the very next day I had this premonition. I was so freaked out and so sad, it makes me feel weird and sad even typing this. I hope he is happy and in peace in heaven. Story 19. I am a science student, and once I was explaining to one of my relative about kidney failure and how does one needs dialysis regularly. I suddenly recalled one of my uncle, who used to visit us often when I was kid, used to play with me and used to bring me many toys as well, having the same problem, but just as I was about to use him as an example, I suddenly had this realization that he is no more, and so I shouldn't talk about him. Then, the very next day, my mother was talking to someone on phone that how that uncle of mine was a great person and had to leave us so early. I rushed to my mom to ask her, confirming my worst fear. I was so shocked to know that my uncle died the very next day I had this premonition. I was so freaked out and so sad, it makes me feel weird and sad even typing this. I hope he is happy and in peace in heaven. Story 20. When my oldest was a baby, 1995, my brother's best friend Chris, 12 years old, died in a car crash. I still lived with my parents at the time and had a basement bedroom. My daughter had one pacifier she absolutely hated, so it was in a drawer in the basement bedroom. My brother and I were sitting in the living room, above my bedroom, talking about Chris. Something fell from the ceiling and landed in my lap. We both saw this. It was the pacifier. After that, it was the only pacifier my daughter would take. She used it until she lost it months later, and never took another one. I always felt like this was Chris telling us he was okay. He loved my daughter. A couple of years later, my brother, 14, took his own life. He is buried by Chris. I fell into a very deep depression that lasted 9 months. This was partly due to my guilt about not seeing the signs of depression in him, and partly because my now ex-husband delighted in telling me my brother was in hell due to the suicide. I was laying awake one night, completely unable to sleep. It was just after 3 a.m. I heard my brother's voice, very loud and clear, say, "I'm okay." I called my parents the next day to tell them about this, and before I even said anything, they told me how they also heard his voice, just after 3 a.m., calling to them. That broke my depression. I still miss him every day, 26 years later, but I know he is okay. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, like it, be sure to write comments, and share your stories.